In a quiet neighborhood where everyone knew each other, a young girl lived with her family in a small house. Her life was simple, full of small joys and daily struggles. The house, though modest, was filled with love. Her parents worked hard, but they always made time for family moments. She spent her days running around the neighborhood, playing with other children and attending school. Among the group of kids she played with, there was one boy who stood out. They had known each other since they were little, sharing the same school, the same playground, and the same street. Their friendship had started when they were just toddlers, each one of them having a favorite game or toy that the other loved. Whether it was building forts out of old cardboard boxes or racing down the street on their bikes, they were inseparable. She always felt that special connection with him. They shared everything, secrets, dreams, and even the fear of what the future might hold. He was her best friend and she was his. They had no idea that as children, they were building the foundation for something much deeper. Their parents often joked about how they would probably grow up together and marry one day. To them, it seemed like the most natural thing. However, life had a way of changing things. When they were around 12 years old, the boy's family had to move away. His father received a new job in another city, and just like that, the bond between the two friends was interrupted. No matter how hard they tried, they couldn't keep in touch. The boy's new life in the city was different from what they had known, and the girl stayed behind in the small town. With time, their conversations grew less frequent, and soon they stopped talking altogether. For years, the girl thought of him often. She missed their long talks and the way he could always make her laugh. But she also realized that life was moving forward, and she had to do the same. School, work, and family life filled her days. She got used to the quiet nights where she'd think about the boy and their childhood days. She would wonder what he was doing, if he still remembered her, and if he had changed. She had never expected to see him again. The world was a big place, and after all those years, it seemed impossible that their paths would cross again. She focused on her own life, trying to make a living and support her family. As time went on, the memories of their childhood became more like faded photographs in the back of her mind. Precious, but distant. One day, while working at a local cafe, she was rushing around serving customers. It was a busy afternoon, and the cafe was filled with the usual crowd. The smell of fresh coffee and pastries filled the air as the girl moved from one table to the next. She had been on her feet all day trying to keep up with orders when something made her stop in her tracks. A man had entered the cafe. He was tall, well-dressed, with an air of confidence that seemed to fill the room. He looked familiar, but she couldn't quite place where she had seen him before. As she made her way to his table, their eyes met, and in that moment something clicked. The memories of their childhood came rushing back like a flood. It was him, the boy she had once known so well. He smiled when he saw her. There was something in his eyes that told her he recognized her too. The man stood up as she approached, his face breaking into a warm smile. "I think we know each other," he said, his voice filled with an unexpected tenderness. She blinked, unsure if she had heard him correctly. You're him, right? From the old neighborhood?" she asked, her heart suddenly beating faster. He nodded, and that was all it took. The floodgates of memory opened wide, and she couldn't help but smile. He hadn't changed much in appearance, though there was a new air of sophistication around him. Gone was the boy she had once known, and in his place was a man who seemed to have everything, except, perhaps, her. The conversation was awkward at first. They both struggled to find the right words as they sat down. He told her about his life in the city, his family's move, and the years that had passed since they last spoke. She shared her own story, the struggles of working at the cafe, living in the same town, and trying to make ends meet. They laughed at the awkwardness of it all, but there was a comfort in being with someone who had once known her so well. For a few moments, they were children again, sitting on the porch, sharing their hopes and dreams. It felt like no time had passed, though so much had. As the afternoon went on, the girl began to feel something stirring inside her. It wasn't just nostalgia or the warmth of a familiar face. It was a feeling she hadn't experienced in years. There was something about the man before her that seemed to rekindle the spark of the connection they once had. He wasn't just her childhood friend anymore. He was someone else. Someone intriguing, someone she couldn't quite figure out. But there was something else that caught her attention. He had a certain way about him, a quiet confidence that spoke of wealth and success, though he hadn't said a word about it. He didn't flaunt anything. But there was an undeniable aura around him that made her wonder if there was more to him than what he had shared. She couldn't place it, but the way he spoke, the way he carried himself, told her that he had a life much different from the one she was living. It was hard for her to ignore the thought. What had happened to him after they'd lost touch? How had he changed? She wanted to ask him so many questions, but she held back. After all, they were just reconnecting, and she didn't want to pry too soon. The conversation drifted to other things, memories of their school days, the games they used to play, the adventures they'd had. It was like picking up right where they left off, and for a while the outside world seemed to disappear. As the day came to a close, he stood up to leave. She felt a strange sense of disappointment, unsure of what to make of the sudden meeting. But before he left, he looked at her with those familiar eyes. "It was really good to see you again," he said softly. "Maybe we could catch up sometime." The girl smiled, though a small part of her felt conflicted. She wasn't sure what to make of the whole thing. Could this really be the same boy from her childhood? And what did it mean that they had crossed paths again, all these years later? Little did she know this unexpected reunion would be the beginning of something neither of them could have predicted. The boy, now a man, had come back into her life, and with him, the memories of the past, and a future neither of them could yet understand. As the door closed behind him, she stood there for a moment, lost in thought, wondering if this was just another coincidence or the start of something much more meaningful. The next few days felt different for the girl. It wasn't that anything had changed in her life, but something inside her had shifted. The memory of seeing him again lingered, and it seemed to be on her mind constantly. She found herself wondering if she had imagined it, or if he truly was the same boy from her childhood. The more she thought about it, the more she realized that it wasn't just the reunion that had affected her. It was him. She had never expected to see him again. It wasn't just a coincidence. It felt almost like fate. They had shared so many memories together, and now, after all these years, they had found each other again. But this time it was different. He wasn't the same boy. He had changed. She could see it in the way he carried himself, in the way he spoke. There was a calmness, a quiet confidence in him that spoke volumes about the life he had built for himself. It was clear that he was no longer just the boy from the neighborhood. He was someone who had made something of himself. For the girl, however, things hadn't been quite as simple. Life hadn't been kind, and she had worked hard just to get by. Her days were long, and the nights were often filled with worry about how she would make ends meet. It wasn't that she was unhappy. She had a family who loved her and friends who cared. But there was always a sense of longing, a quiet feeling that she could have had more. When she had seen him, it was as though a part of her had awakened, a part of her that had forgotten what it felt like to dream, to feel like anything was possible. She hadn't expected to feel this way. She hadn't thought that seeing him again would stir up such emotions. She had moved on from the past, from her childhood crush, but now she found herself thinking about him in ways she hadn't before. She had remembered how he used to make her laugh, how they used to talk about their futures, and how they had once promised each other that no matter what happened, they would always be there for each other. But the reality of their lives now was different. She worked long hours at the cafe, doing what she could to support herself and her family. She was proud of the work she did, but there was always a feeling of exhaustion that lingered both physically and emotionally. She had built a life for herself, but it wasn't easy. She had never known anything else, so she didn't complain. But she couldn't help but wonder if he had a life that was easier, a life filled with opportunities that she could only dream of. In the days that followed, the girl couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed between them. It wasn't just the memories that resurfaced, but the way he had looked at her when they spoke. She had seen something in his eyes that made her think he wasn't just interested in catching up. He was genuinely looking at her in a way that made her feel special. It was strange, though. She had no idea what to make of it. She knew that his life was different, that he had a world of experience and success that she could never imagine. And yet, in that brief moment they had shared together, there was something about him that made her feel like they were still those two children, sitting together in the park, talking about their dreams. The next time he came into the cafe, she was ready for it. She didn't expect him to come in every day, but when she saw him walk through the door, it felt like her heart skipped a beat. He waved at her and she smiled back, trying to keep her composure. She wasn't sure why she felt so nervous, but she did. He was a reminder of the past, and yet now he was part of the present. He was part of her life in a way she hadn't expected, and she didn't know what it meant. They talked again, casually at first. He asked about her life, how things were going. She told him about the cafe, about her family, and about the struggles she faced. He listened intently, and for the first time in a long time she felt like someone truly understood her. It was strange, this connection they had. It wasn't just nostalgia, it was real. He was here in front of her, listening, and for a moment everything else seemed to fade away. She noticed, though, that he was still holding something back. He didn't talk about his own life much, not in detail anyway. He mentioned his work, his travels, but it was always vague. There was something about him, a sense of mystery that she couldn't quite put her finger on. She had a feeling that he was hiding something big, but she didn't press him on it. After all, it was none of her business. He was a successful man now, and his life was his own. As the conversation progressed, she found herself opening up more than she had expected. She talked about her hopes, about how she wished things could be different, how she dreamed of a better life. She told him about the things she had always wanted to do, but never had the chance to. And to her surprise, he seemed genuinely interested. He didn't dismiss her dreams or make her feel silly for having them. Instead, he encouraged her, telling her that there was more to life than just working to survive. He told her that there were opportunities out there if she was willing to take them. The girl had always known this, of course. She had always believed that one day she would be able to live the life she wanted, but it felt so far out of reach. Yet when he said it, it sounded different. His words were filled with conviction, and for a moment she allowed herself to believe in them. She allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, there was more to life than what she had settled for. But even as she felt this flicker of hope, she couldn't ignore the nagging feeling that she wasn't enough. She wasn't enough for him. He was successful, well-traveled, and had the world at his feet. She was just a girl working at a cafe, struggling to make ends meet. What could he possibly see in her? What could they possibly have in common now after all these years? It wasn't that she doubted herself. She knew she was capable, she knew she was strong. But there was a part of her that couldn't help but wonder if he saw her as something more than just a reminder of the past. She wasn't sure how she felt about it, about him, about the way he made her feel. And then, just as quickly as it had begun, he stood up to leave. "It was good to see you again," he said with a smile. "Maybe we can do this more often." "Catch up, I mean." She nodded, not sure what to say. "I'd like that," she replied, though she wasn't sure if it was true. She wasn't sure what this was, this connection they had. It felt like more than friendship, but not quite romance either. He left, and once again she was left standing there, lost in her thoughts. She wondered what he thought of her, whether he was still the same person who had shared her childhood dreams, or if he had become someone so different that she couldn't even recognize him anymore. But one thing was certain. She couldn't ignore the feelings that had started to stir inside her. Feelings that made her question everything about her life and what she wanted from it. The next few days after their conversation felt different for the girl. She couldn't stop thinking about him, about the way he looked at her, about the way their conversations felt so natural despite all the years that had passed. She kept trying to convince herself that it was nothing more than the familiarity of childhood friendship resurfacing. But deep down, she knew it was more than that. There was something real between them, something that neither of them could ignore. He continued to come into the cafe, and every time he did, she couldn't help but feel a flutter of excitement in her chest. They would talk for hours about everything and nothing. Sometimes it felt like they were still those two kids who had spent their days dreaming about the future, sharing secrets and making promises to each other. But now they were adults, and things were different. She still couldn't shake the feeling that his life was so much bigger than hers. He spoke about his travels, his work, and the people he met, and it seemed like his world was full of opportunities and excitement. It made her wonder where she had gone wrong. She had always dreamed of doing more, of seeing more, of living a life that was more than just the daily grind. But here she was, stuck in the same routine, working long hours at the cafe just to get by. Yet every time he spoke, there was something about him that made her feel like anything was possible. He would tell her stories of his experiences, and she would listen, captivated by his words. But there was something else in the way he spoke, something that made her think he was trying to tell her more. It wasn't just about the places he had been or the things he had done. It was about the way he saw her. There was something in his eyes, a look that made her wonder if he saw her differently than he saw anyone else. She wasn't sure what to make of it. She had spent so many years trying to build a life for herself, trying to make a living, that she had forgotten what it felt like to dream. He made her want to dream again, but at the same time she couldn't ignore the fear that if she allowed herself to get too close, if she let herself fall for him again, she would only get hurt. It wasn't that she didn't believe in love, she did. But love, in her experience, always came with its own set of complications. She had learned to keep her heart guarded, to focus on the practical things in life. She couldn't afford to be distracted by feelings or dreams, not when there was so much at stake. But there was something about him that made her want to let go of all those fears. When he looked at her, when they talked, she felt like the world was smaller, like it was just the two of them sharing a moment in time. She couldn't remember the last time she had felt that way, and it made her both nervous and excited. One evening, after a long shift at the cafe, she was cleaning up when he walked in. It was late, and the cafe was quieter than usual, with only a few patrons scattered around. She was surprised to see him, but she smiled when she saw him approach. "Late night?" she asked, wiping down the counter as he took a seat. "Yeah," he said, his voice soft, almost contemplative. "I had some work to finish up. Thought I'd come by and see you." There was something in his voice, something that made her feel like he wasn't just here for coffee. She set the rag down and walked over to his table, her heart beating a little faster than usual. "You're always welcome," she said with a smile. "But if you're looking for a quiet spot, I can't promise much." "It's been a long day," he chuckled. "I don't mind. It's nice to just sit here for a while." They sat in silence for a few moments, and she couldn't help but feel the weight of the moment. It was different from the usual conversations they had. It was quieter, more intimate. She couldn't put her finger on it, but it felt like something was changing between them. "So, how's everything?" she asked, breaking the silence. He sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "It's good," he said slowly. "But sometimes I don't know. It just feels like I'm going through the motions, you know? Like there's this emptiness that I can't shake." She was taken aback. He had always seemed so confident, so sure of himself. To hear him speak like this was surprising. "Emptiness?" she asked, her voice soft. "But you have everything, right? I mean, you've built this successful life. You've done things most people only dream of." He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "It's not that simple. Sometimes I feel like all the success in the world doesn't make up for what's missing inside." She didn't know what to say. She had always thought that success was the answer to everything, that once you had everything you wanted, everything else would fall into place. But now, seeing him like this, it made her realize that success wasn't always the answer. There were things that couldn't be bought or achieved through hard work alone. For a moment, they both sat there in silence, each of them lost in their own thoughts. The quiet of the cafe seemed to stretch around them, and she could feel the tension between them growing. "Do you ever feel like that?" he asked, breaking the silence again. "Like there's something more you want, something that's missing, but you don't know what it is?" She thought about it for a long moment. She had never really stopped to think about what she wanted, not in the way he was asking. She had always been so focused on surviving, on getting by, that she hadn't considered what her heart truly desired. "I think I've spent so much time focusing on what I don't have that I forgot to think about what I really want," she said slowly. "I've just been going through the motions too." He looked at her, his eyes intense, as though he was seeing her for the first time. "You deserve more than that," he said quietly. "You deserve to be happy, to have everything you want." She looked down at her hands, suddenly feeling self-conscious. "I don't know if that's possible," she whispered. He reached across the table, gently placing his hand over hers. "It is," he said, his voice soft and reassuring. "You just have to believe it." For a moment she sat there, lost in the warmth of his touch. It felt so natural, so right, yet it scared her. She had never let herself believe in something that seemed so out of reach. She had never allowed herself to think that she could have it all. Success, love, happiness. She had always told herself that she wasn't meant for that kind of life. But now, looking at him, hearing his words, she wasn't so sure anymore. Maybe she was meant for more. Maybe they both were. "I've missed this," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. "I've missed you." He smiled at her, a real smile this time, one that reached his eyes. "I've missed you too." More than you know. It felt like something shifted between them, something that couldn't be undone. The walls they had built up over the years, walls of distance, of time, of fear, were slowly crumbling. And for the first time in a long while, she felt like she could breathe again. As the days passed, the girl found herself caught in a whirlwind of emotions. The connection she shared with him was undeniable, but it was also complicated. She had spent so many years living a simple, quiet life that the idea of something more, something that could truly change her life, seemed both exciting and terrifying. They spent more and more time together. Every time he came into the cafe, it felt like an opportunity to reconnect, to talk, to laugh, and to share in each other's lives. But there was always an underlying tension, a sense that neither of them was fully being honest with the other. He would speak about his travels, his work, his adventures, and she would listen intently, but never share the deeper parts of her own life. She kept her struggles, her dreams, and her fears to herself, afraid that opening up too much would only complicate things. The boy, or rather, the man he had become, was no longer the carefree, fun-loving child she had once known. He was someone else now, someone who had seen the world, someone who had learned how to navigate the complexities of life and success. But despite all of that, there was still a part of him that seemed just as vulnerable as he had been when they were young. One afternoon, after another long shift at the cafe, she sat down for a break, taking a deep breath as she sipped on a cup of coffee. It had been a particularly busy day and her feet ached from running around. The cafe was quieter now, the rush of the morning and afternoon fading into the calm of evening. Just as she set the cup down, the door opened and she looked up to see him walk in. Her heart skipped a beat and she tried to keep her composure as she wiped her hands on her apron. He smiled at her as he approached, and once again, she felt that familiar warmth spread through her chest. "Long day?" he asked, his voice casual but kind. "Yeah," she said with a tired smile. "But nothing I can't handle." He raised an eyebrow. "You say that every time." She laughed, the sound of it surprising her. She hadn't realized how much she had missed laughing like this, so freely, so naturally. "I guess I'm just used to it by now." He sat down across from her, his gaze soft. "I admire that," he said quietly. "You're strong." She wasn't sure what to say. She had never thought of herself as strong. She had always just done what needed to be done, not thinking too much about it, but hearing him say it made her pause. "Thanks," she said, unsure of how to respond to the compliment. "I guess we all have our strengths, right?" He smiled at her, that same warm, sincere smile that always made her feel like the most important person in the room. "You're right," he said. "But I think you've had to be strong in ways I can't even imagine." She didn't know how to respond to that either. She had spent so many years keeping everything inside, hiding the parts of herself that felt weak or vulnerable, that she wasn't used to someone acknowledging that there was more to her than just the exterior, more than just the hard-working woman who ran the cafe day in and day out. They sat in silence for a few moments, each of them lost in their thoughts. The hum of the cafe, the distant clinking of cups, and the soft music playing in the background created an atmosphere that felt peaceful, almost intimate, you know, he said finally, breaking the silence. "I've been thinking a lot about what you said the other day." She looked up at him, confused. "What did I say?" "When we were talking about what's missing, about what we want from life," he said, his voice gentle but serious. "You said that you didn't know if you could have it all." "But I think you can." She felt a lump form in her throat at his words. She had never really allowed herself to believe that she could have everything she wanted. She had always been taught to be content with what she had, to appreciate the little things and to never dream too big. But hearing him say that, hearing him believe in her in a way she had never done for herself, shook her. "I don't know," she said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. "I've always been afraid to hope for too much. I didn't want to get disappointed." He reached across the table, taking her hand in his. His touch was warm and steady, grounding her in a way she hadn't expected. "I understand that fear," he said softly. "But don't let it hold you back. Don't let it stop you from reaching for more. You deserve it." She wanted to believe him. She wanted to believe that she could have the life she had always dreamed of. The freedom, the love, the happiness. But the doubt still lingered. She still felt like a small-town girl who had never left the place where she grew up, who had never had the chance to experience the world beyond the cafe and her home. How could she even begin to imagine a life that was different from the one she had known? But as she sat there looking at him, she realized something. Maybe she didn't have to know all the answers right away. Maybe, just maybe, she could start by allowing herself to dream again, by taking small steps one at a time towards something bigger. Something better. I'll try, she said, her voice barely audible. His smile grew wider, and for the first time in a long time, she felt a surge of hope that made her believe it was possible. Over the next few weeks, things between them continued to evolve. The more time they spent together, the more they opened up to each other. They talked about everything, their hopes, their fears, their pasts. She told him about the struggles she had faced growing up, about the challenges of working at the cafe, and about the sacrifices her family had made, and he told her about his life, his travels, and the things he had learned along the way. It wasn't always easy for her to open up, to let someone see the parts of her that were vulnerable and uncertain, but with him it felt natural. It felt right. And each time they shared something, each time they let down their guards, it brought them closer together. One afternoon, as they sat together in the quiet corner of the cafe, he took her hand again, his thumb gently stroking the back of her hand. "I want you to know something," he said, his voice low and serious. "I've been thinking about this a lot, and I need you to understand that I'm not just here because of the past. I'm here because of you." Her heart skipped a beat, and she looked up at him, her chest tightening with emotions she didn't know how to name. "What do you mean?" "I mean," he said, his eyes soft and full of sincerity, "I've come to realize that what we had as kids wasn't just a fluke. It wasn't just a childhood crush or a passing thing. What we had, it was real. And I think we could have something even more real now." Her breath caught in her throat. She had never expected to hear him say those words. Not after all the time that had passed. But as she looked into his eyes, she saw the truth in them. She saw the honesty, the vulnerability, and the desire to build something real together. "I've been scared," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "Scared to hope, scared to trust. But I think I'm ready to try." He smiled at her, and for the first time, she felt like the weight she had been carrying for so long had been lifted. Maybe, just maybe, she could have it all. And maybe, with him, she could start to believe that anything was possible. The days that followed were filled with a quiet excitement. They both knew things were changing between them. Each time they met, the bond they shared grew stronger, and yet, it was as if they were still trying to find their way back to each other. The more they talked, the more they realized how much they had missed in each other's lives. Despite the years that had passed, the connection was undeniable. She found herself looking forward to their time together more and more. It wasn't just the conversations, although those were comforting and filled with memories. It was the way he made her feel, like she mattered, like her thoughts and dreams were worth something. In his presence, she felt seen in a way she hadn't in a long time. He didn't just see the woman who worked at the cafe, the girl who had grown up in the small town. He saw her, all of her. And that made her feel like maybe, just maybe, she was capable of more than she had ever allowed herself to believe. But as much as she wanted to believe in the possibility of something more, there were still doubts. She was afraid to hope. She was afraid of falling too deeply, of getting hurt, of being disappointed. She had spent so many years learning how to guard her heart that the thought of opening it up again made her nervous. She wasn't sure if she was ready for that kind of vulnerability, for the risk that came with truly giving herself to someone else. He, on the other hand, seemed to have no reservations. He spoke of the future with a confidence that was both comforting and intimidating. He talked about possibilities, places they could go, things they could do, and every time he did, it made her heart race. But she held back. She told herself that they needed more time. She needed more time. She wasn't ready to leap into something that could change everything, even if part of her wanted to. One evening, they were sitting in the small corner booth at the cafe, talking about their childhood. He was telling her a story about something silly they had done when they were kids, and she was laughing, the sound of it ringing out in the quiet cafe. It felt good to laugh again, to share those memories, but there was still an unspoken tension between them. It wasn't awkward, but it was there, an undercurrent of something deeper that neither of them was ready to name. He stopped mid-sentence, his eyes searching hers. She noticed the change in his expression, the way his smile faded slightly, replaced by a look that was both serious and soft. "You know, I've been thinking," he said, his voice quiet, almost hesitant. "I've been thinking about us, about what this is, what we're doing here." Her heart skipped a beat. She hadn't expected him to bring it up, not so directly. She had been avoiding it in her mind, pretending that everything was fine, that they didn't need to define things. But now, sitting there with him, the weight of his words made her realize that maybe it was time to face it. "I know what you mean," she said, her voice steady, but her mind racing. "I've been thinking about it too, but I'm just not sure." He nodded, his gaze not leaving hers. "I don't want to rush you. I don't want to make you feel like you have to decide right now, but I can't help how I feel. I've missed you so much, and seeing you again, it's made me realize that I don't want to go back to just being friends. I want more. I want us to see where this can go, to try something real." She felt a lump form in her throat. It wasn't that she didn't feel the same way, she did. She had been trying to ignore the growing feelings she had for him, telling herself that it was too complicated, that it was too soon, that it was too risky. But in that moment, hearing him say it out loud, she couldn't ignore it anymore. She knew he was right. She didn't want to go back to just being friends either. She wanted more too, but there was still fear, still doubt. What if this didn't work out? What if she let herself fall for him only to end up heartbroken again? She had already given so much of herself to people who hadn't been able to see her for who she truly was. Could she really risk opening her heart to someone again, even if it was him? "I don't know," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm scared. I don't want to make the wrong choice." "I get that," he said softly, his hand reaching out to gently touch hers. "But we don't have to have all the answers right now. We don't have to figure everything out. We just have to take it one step at a time. And if it doesn't work, we'll deal with it. But I don't want to live in fear anymore. I want to take this chance." His words, so sincere and filled with understanding, made her heart ache. She had spent so much of her life playing it safe, holding herself back from what she really wanted. Maybe it was time to stop being afraid, to take the risk even if it was scary. "I don't want to be afraid anymore either," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "I want to see where this can go. I want to try." He smiled at her then, a smile that was filled with both relief and joy. "You don't have to be afraid," he said softly. "I'm here. I'm not going anywhere." In that moment, something shifted between them. The air around them seemed to lighten, as if the weight of all their unspoken words had been lifted. They didn't need to have it all figured out. They didn't need to know where this would lead. They just needed to take that first step, to allow themselves to be vulnerable, to trust each other. From that point on, things between them were different. The conversations were no longer just casual chats between old friends. They were deeper, more meaningful. They shared their hopes, their fears, and everything in between. She began to open up to him in ways she hadn't with anyone in years, and he did the same. It was as if they were slowly rebuilding the connection they had once shared. But this time it was stronger. This time it was real. They spent more time together, not just at the cafe, but outside of it as well. They went for walks, had long talks over coffee, and even started to make plans for the future. It wasn't a perfect fairy tale. There were still moments of doubt, moments when she wondered if it was all too good to be true. But with him by her side, she began to believe in the possibility of something more. She began to believe that maybe, just maybe, she was worthy of that kind of love. The world around them seemed to fade away when they were together. The struggles she had faced, the doubts that had once held her back, didn't seem so overwhelming anymore. They still existed, of course, but with him, she felt like she could face anything. Together, they were stronger. One evening, after a particularly long day, they sat in the park watching the sunset. The sky was painted in shades of orange and pink, and the air was cool but not uncomfortable. She leaned her head on his shoulder, feeling his warmth against her, and for the first time in a long time, she felt truly at peace. "I'm glad we took this chance," she said softly, her voice barely a whisper. "Me too," he replied, his voice low and steady. "I wouldn't want to be anywhere else." And in that moment, she realized that she had taken the leap. She had taken the risk, opened her heart, and allowed herself to believe in something more. And with him, it felt like everything was finally falling into place. As the weeks went by, the connection between the girl and the man became undeniable. They spent more and more time together, exploring not just the world around them, but the depths of their own hearts. There were no grand gestures, no big declarations, just simple moments, quiet exchanges, and the comforting presence of one another. Their relationship was something they both cherished, something that felt real, not rushed or forced. They had come a long way since that first meeting at the cafe. Their bond had grown, and with each passing day, they became more attuned to each other. It wasn't always easy, of course. They still had their doubts and insecurities, but they learned to be patient with each other, to listen when things were left unsaid, and to trust that they could face whatever came their way together. One evening, they found themselves sitting on the old bench in the park, the same place where they had shared so many memories from their childhood. The sun was setting, casting a soft golden glow over the trees, and the gentle breeze carried with it the scent of summer. It felt like the perfect moment to just be. The man took her hand in his fingers lightly brushing over hers, sending a wave of warmth through her. They sat in comfortable silence, the kind that only two people who truly understood each other could share. "Do you ever wonder," he asked quietly, breaking the silence, "what might have happened if we hadn't lost touch all those years ago?" She thought about it for a moment, the question stirring something deep inside her. "I do," she admitted. "I wonder what we could have been if we'd stayed in each other's lives. Maybe things would have turned out differently." He smiled, the kind of smile that made her heart flutter. "Maybe. But then again, maybe we wouldn't be here now in this moment." She looked at him, her heart skipping a beat. He was right. If they had never lost touch, if they had stayed in each other's lives all along, they might never have rediscovered each other. They might never have had the chance to see one another with fresh eyes to appreciate what they had now. "I don't regret it," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. I think everything happened the way it was supposed to." He turned to face her, his eyes locking with hers. "I don't regret it either," he said, his voice full of sincerity. "And I'm glad we're here now." They sat there for a long time, watching as the sky slowly darkened, the stars beginning to twinkle in the night. There was something comforting about the stillness, something that made her feel like she had finally found a place where she belonged. But even in the peacefulness of the moment, there was a nagging thought in the back of her mind. She couldn't help but feel like something was still holding her back. There was a part of her that wasn't fully able to let go of her fears, the fear that everything could fall apart, that they could both be hurt by the very thing that had brought them together. The man noticed the shift in her demeanor and gently squeezed her hand. "What's on your mind?" he asked, his voice soft. She hesitated for a moment, unsure of how to put her thoughts into words. "I'm just scared," she admitted. "Scared that this is all too good to be true. Scared that if I let myself fully believe in this, in us, it'll all come crashing down." He nodded, his gaze understanding. "I get it," he said quietly. "I've been scared too, but I don't want to live in fear anymore. I want to take a chance on us. I want to see where this can go." She looked at him, searching his face for any sign of hesitation, but all she saw was sincerity. He was being honest, as he always had been, and for the first time she allowed herself to believe in the possibility of something real. "I want that too," she said softly. I don't know how to let go of the fear." He smiled at her, a reassuring smile that made her feel like everything was going to be okay. "We don't have to have all the answers right now. We just have to keep moving forward one step at a time, together." It was simple, really. It wasn't about grand gestures or trying to control the future. It was about trust. Trusting each other, trusting the connection they shared, and trusting that no matter what happened, they would face it together. And in that moment, she realized that it wasn't about having everything figured out. It was about being willing to take the leap, to allow herself to fully embrace what was happening between them. She smiled at him, her heart feeling lighter than it had in a long time. "Okay," she said softly. Together. They leaned into each other, the world around them fading away as they shared a quiet, intimate moment. It felt like the beginning of something new, something they both knew was worth fighting for. As the days turned into weeks, their relationship continued to deepen. They learned more about each other, not just the surface things, but the little details. The way he liked his coffee, the books she loved to read, the childhood memories that still made them laugh. They shared their dreams, their fears, and their hopes for the future. It wasn't perfect, and there were still moments of doubt, but those moments were becoming fewer and farther between. The more they trusted each other, the more they allowed themselves to be vulnerable, the more their bond grew. And yet, despite everything, there was still one thing hanging over her, the truth about his life, about his success and the life he had built without her. She had always been careful about asking too many questions, unsure of how to approach the subject, but lately she couldn't help but wonder how it all fit together. How could he, someone with so much, want someone like her, someone who had struggled just to make ends meet? One evening, after they had spent the day exploring the city together, she found herself sitting across from him at a quiet cafe, her fingers nervously tracing the edge of her coffee cup. "Can I ask you something?" she said, her voice uncertain. He looked at her, his eyes soft and understanding. "Of course. You can ask me anything." She took a deep breath, gathering the courage to voice the question that had been on her mind for so long. "What's it like?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Your life, I mean. You've been everywhere, done so much. I just don't understand how someone like you could want someone like me. I'm not like you. I don't have the same experiences, the same world, and I can't help but wonder if you're just settling for me." The words hung in the air, and for a moment she regretted asking. But before she could say anything more, he reached across the table, taking her hand in his. "I don't want you to ever feel like that," he said softly. "I'm not settling for you. I'm choosing you. Every day. And I've never been more sure of anything in my life." She looked into his eyes, searching for any hint of insincerity, but all she saw was truth. And in that moment she realized that it didn't matter what his life had been like, or how different it was from hers. What mattered was that they had found each other, and they were willing to take the chance to make something real out of it. "I'm not perfect," he continued, his voice gentle. "I've made mistakes, and I've been through my own struggles. But none of that changes how I feel about you. You don't have to be like me. You just have to be yourself." She felt a wave of emotion wash over her. She had been so afraid of not being enough, of not measuring up to the life he had built for himself. But now, as she sat across from him, she realized that it wasn't about comparing herself to his past or his success. It was about the present, about the connection they shared, and about the love that was growing between them. "I'm ready," she said softly, her voice full of conviction. "I'm ready to see where this can go together." He smiled at her, his eyes filled with warmth and affection. "So am I," he said, his voice steady and full of promise. And in that moment she knew that they were both ready to take the next step, to embrace whatever the future had in store for them, and to build a life together, one filled with love, trust, and the hope that anything was possible.